Hello and welcome. Today, we delve into a story of ingenuity that could have revolutionized naval construction, if only it had been recognized earlier. Imagine a modest welder earning just $11 a day in March of 1941, who secretly devised a simple, groundbreaking solution to cut the time it took to build submarines by over 50 million man-hours. How could a small idea, welded studs instead of bolts, have transformed an entire industry? What if the traditional, slow methods of attaching wooden decks to steel hulls were not only inefficient but also unnecessary? Could a single innovation have saved thousands of lives during a global war? And what secrets lie hidden in the seemingly mundane routine of shipyard workers, waiting for the moment when a clever mind dares to challenge the status quo? All these questions point to one central puzzle. How did a single, overlooked idea, initially dismissed and ignored, come to change the course of history? The answer is a story of perseverance, timing, and unseen brilliance. This video will trace that journey from frustrated welder to wartime hero, revealing how one man's quiet rebellion against bureaucracy sparked a technological revolution. We will uncover how his invention accelerated the construction of hundreds of submarines, aircraft carriers, and battleships, saving millions of hours and countless lives, yet remained largely unrecognized for decades. So, stay with us as we follow the path of that innovation, from a dusty garage in Vallejo to the vast shipyards that turned the tide of World War II. Because what's about to begin is not just a tale of metal and welding, it's a testament to the power of one idea, daring to challenge the impossible, and changing history in the process. The most incredible breakthroughs often start with a simple question: is there a better way? And now, that question is about to be answered. In the dim glow of March of 1941, within the bustling confines of the Mayer Island Naval Shipyard nestled along the Napa River in Vallejo, California, a scene of intense activity unfolded. The flickering blue flames of a welding torch cast fleeting shadows across the cluttered interior of a submarine construction bay, where Edward Nelson, an earnest and dedicated welder earning merely $11 a day, meticulously recorded his mounting frustrations in a well-worn notebook and scrap paper. His thoughts often echoed the same deep sentiment: there simply had to be a better way to do this. The current methods were nothing short of madness. Despite his repeated attempts to suggest improvements, the Navy's supervisors seemed deaf to his ideas, insisting instead that he accelerate his work rate. Yet Nelson, who had spent countless hours theorizing and experimenting, knew that the existing procedures for assembling these mighty vessels were far from efficient. He had just witnessed a distressing sight that inflamed his blood: a dozen workers laboring tirelessly for an entire shift just to attach a single section of deck planking to the submarine's steel hull. Enormous scaffolding structures loomed inside the ship, filling the cramped compartments beneath each wooden deck. Men with wrenches in hand, working amid tight spaces, twisted nuts onto bolts that pierced downward from above, all in an effort to secure fragile wooden planking to the mighty steel frame below. It's difficult to imagine a more painstaking process: hours and hours of focused labor dedicated solely to nailing wooden boards into position. The traditional method required meticulous precision, patience, and, quite clearly, a significant investment of time. Luxuries that America simply could not afford as the clouds of war gathered ominously over the Pacific Ocean. Yet, despite the urgency, the methods employed in this vital shipyard remained stubbornly rooted in procedures passed down through decades, unchanged and unchallenged. The man behind this frustration was Theodore Edward Nelson, a man whose 36 years had been shaped by a life of hard-earned mechanical knowledge. Born and raised in California, Nelson had spent 15 years sharpening his skills in various machine shops scattered across the state, from Stockton to Los Angeles. Over those years, he had learned how metal behaved under various conditions, how electricity could be harnessed to power machines, and most importantly, how complex problems could be solved if only someone was willing to listen. Yet, what these Navy supervisors did not realize was that Nelson had already devised an alternative method for attaching those crucial wooden planks. An innovative idea that, had it been accepted, could have revolutionized the entire process. What Nelson lacked at that moment was recognition, and what his superiors lacked was the insight into how drastically his solution could change the game. They dismissed his suggestions, branding them as impractical or unnecessary. Little did they know, however, that this seemingly modest, overlooked innovation was destined to save the United States Navy over 50 million man-hours. Moreover, it would forever alter the architecture of naval construction in the years to come. This transformation had quietly begun weeks earlier, deep within the constrained interior spaces below decks, where the real battle against inefficiency was fought every single day. The date was March 15, 1941, just under 8 months before the attack on Pearl Harbor would thrust America into war. At the time, Mayer Island Naval Shipyard spanned 635 acres along the Napa River in Vallejo, California, about 25 miles northeast of San Francisco. Founded in the year of 1854 by Commander David Glasgow Farragut, this shipyard was distinguished as the first ever U.S. Navy installation established on the Pacific Ocean. By early 1941, it had grown into the premier submarine construction hub on the West Coast. Operating relentlessly around the clock, the yard employed approximately 12,000 civilian workers in that year, a formidable force that would soon swell to nearly 50,000 by the year 1944, as tensions with Japan escalated rapidly and the demand for submarines soared to unprecedented levels. Among those many workers was Ted Nelson, assigned employee number 3872. He earned his modest $11 per day, working the day shift from the early hours of dawn at 7 until mid-afternoon at 4, every single day. His specialty was welding, primarily the hulls and internal structures of submarines, tasks demanding both speed and accuracy. Nelson was highly skilled at his craft, known for his proficiency in speed, yet increasingly he felt a gnawing sense of frustration. He saw clearly how much could be done more efficiently, how much manpower and time could be saved with even slight modifications to the existing processes. But at that point, despite his ingenuity, Nelson was still operating largely in the shadows of the shipyard's sprawling operations, dreaming of a better way while the machinery of war continued its relentless march forward, seemingly indifferent to individual innovation. Yet, beneath his modest exterior and routine work lay a mind eager to challenge the status quo, and a vision that would eventually, quietly, trigger a revolution in naval everywhere he looked. The problem was glaringly obvious, a persistent obstacle that stubbornly refused to be overlooked. It was the cumbersome, antiquated process of installing wooden deck planking on submarines, destroyers, and aircraft carriers, a crucial yet painfully slow procedure that had remained largely unchanged for decades. The Navy had chosen wooden decks for a variety of reasons. Wood offered superior grip compared to steel in wet conditions, helping crew members maintain their footing during rough seas. It operated more quietly, reducing noise that could alert enemies or compromise stealth. It provided some insulation against the cold steel beneath, making the environment slightly more bearable for those working on deck. Moreover, in the event of a fire, wooden decks could be repaired or replaced more swiftly than welded steel plates, which required welding expertise and could mean extended downtimes. Despite these advantages, the installation method itself was strikingly archaic. It was intricate, labor-intensive, and excruciatingly slow, an outdated process that hindered the Navy's ability to rapidly outfit its vessels with essential equipment. This method, unchanged since the days of the First World War, involved a complex series of meticulous steps that tested the patience and endurance of every worker involved. Firstly, skilled laborers would drill precisely measured holes through the wooden planks to ensure proper attachment points. These holes had to be carefully countersunk so that the heads of the attachment bolts sat flush with the surface of the deck, ensuring no protrusions could pose a hazard or interfere with the deck's smooth surface. Once the holes were drilled and countersunk, the workers would position the wooden planks onto the steel framework beneath, carefully aligning each piece. But what followed was often described as a nightmare, a hazardous, back-breaking phase that demanded extraordinary effort. Workers had to construct elaborate scaffolding beneath the deck, extending deep into the ship or submarine's interior, often requiring multiple levels to access the underside of the steel deck framework. Building this scaffolding was an arduous task that consumed significant time and effort before any actual deck work could begin. With the scaffolding in place, the next step involved coordination between workers above and below. From above, crew would insert long threaded bolts through the wooden planks, guiding them through matching holes in the steel framework. Meanwhile, workers below, standing on precarious platforms within cramped and dimly lit compartments, would thread nuts onto the protruding bolt ends. Tightening these nuts with wrenches was a painstaking process, pulling the wooden planks tightly against the steel framework above, ensuring a secure fit. Once the nuts were firmly in place, the workers on deck would fill each drilled hole with wooden plugs, smoothing out the surface and completing the decking process. This entire sequence had to be repeated meticulously for every section of the deck, from bow to stern. For a typical submarine, covering several hundred square feet, the task required hundreds of individual attachment points, each needing a bolt and nut secured just right. In the case of an aircraft carrier, where the wooden flight deck stretched tens of thousands of square feet, the scale of the operation was truly staggering. The labor demands were immense. A standard submarine deck installation involved a crew of roughly a dozen to 16 men working relentlessly for anywhere between 5 and 7 days. The construction and eventual dismantling of the scaffolding alone took about 2 full days, with the bolts and nuts assembly occupying the remaining time. Among those familiar with the process was Ted Nelson, a seasoned worker who had performed this exact task dozens of times. He had spent countless hours balancing on scaffolding within cramped submarine compartments, barely 4 feet high, threading nuts onto bolts in nearly complete darkness. The backaches from hours of bending and stooping were a constant companion, and his knuckles bore scars from slips and mishandled wrenches. His patience, worn thin by repeated repetitions of this grueling routine, was at its limit. Yet, Nelson's frustrations ran deeper than personal fatigue. He understood the bigger picture all too well. The looming threat of war cast a long shadow over everything at Mare Island Navy Yard. Everyone there knew conflict was inevitable, ramping up tensions, preparing ships and submarines for the chaos to come. The yard was already falling behind schedule on submarine construction and other vital projects. The Navy's immediate priority was to get vessels operational and ready for deployment. Idle in dry dock, waiting for weeks, sometimes months, for decks to be installed, was unacceptable. Every delay meant not just wasted time and resources but also an increased vulnerability, it was a delay that could have severe consequences during wartime. Nelson was acutely aware that America's readiness was still far from assured. The nation needed combat-ready ships, and urgently. He had been contemplating a better way to approach the deck installation problem, driven by his experience and frustration with the current process. The traditional method was an obsolescent relic that hampered progress, and he believed there had to be a more efficient, innovative solution. As he looked out over the assembly line of ships and submarines, the urgency in his for months, Nelson ruminated over this problem during the long, monotonous hours of his routine welding job aboard the ship. The solution, he believed, was clear and elegant, sitting just outside the current methods used in naval construction. Why continue the cumbersome process of bolting components from above and then threading nuts from below, when a more streamlined, efficient approach could be implemented? It struck him that instead of relying on nuts and bolts, perhaps he could weld attachment studs directly onto the steel framework, seamlessly and securely. The idea was straightforward in concept. Perform a weld from a single side, specifically from above, eliminating the need for scaffolding, nuts, bolts, or the coordination of work crews in cramped, inaccessible spaces below decks. Instead, the process would involve fast, durable, and permanent welds made from the top side only. To realize this, he envisioned threaded studs, which are essentially headless bolts, being swiftly welded onto the steel deck framework. Once in place, wooden planks would have threaded inserts or specialized nuts that could be attached easily to these studs. The entire operation could be performed efficiently from above, significantly reducing the work time and increasing safety by removing the necessity of working in confined, hazardous spaces. This approach meant that no scaffolding would be needed, and workers above would not need to coordinate closely with those below, saving both time and effort. Nelson had seen similar stud welding methods before, mostly in their basic form. The technology existed primarily for welding to horizontal flat plates. In those traditional applications, a small amount of flux powder would be placed on a flat steel surface, and the stud would be positioned into this flux. An electrical arc would then fuse the stud to the steel, creating a solid, reliable weld. However, this technique only worked reliably on horizontal surfaces because the flux powder would simply fall off when applied to vertical or overhead surfaces. Since naval construction involves welding in every possible position, vertical, horizontal, overhead, and at various angles, this posed a significant challenge that had puzzled welding engineers for over 20 years. The core question had always been, how can stud welding be adapted for non-horizontal surfaces? Nelson thought he had the perfect answer, and when it arrived in his mind, he nearly laughed out loud at its simplicity. Instead of relying on loose flux powder that depended on gravity to stay in place, why not encase the flux within a small ceramic cap? This cap, attached to the end of each stud, would contain the flux material securely, allowing the stud to be welded in any position, vertical, overhead, or angled, without losing the flux or compromising the weld quality. He quickly sketched his idea into his notebook: a handheld welding gun equipped with a spring-loaded mechanism that presses the stud against the steel surface, combined with an electrical trigger that creates the welding arc. The flux would be housed within a disposable ceramic cap attached to the stud's end. This setup meant that each weld could be completed in less than 1 second. One worker could install dozens of studs in the time it currently took to complete a single bolted connection, dramatically increasing productivity and reducing the need for extensive scaffolding or multiple crews. Eager to share his innovative concept, Nelson took his sketches and ideas to his supervisor, a Navy lieutenant named Morrison. Their meeting was short, lasting less than 5 minutes. Morrison barely glanced at Nelson's drawings before dismissing the idea outright. "We have established procedures," he said curtly. "We follow Navy specifications. If you want to replace bolting with welding, you need to stick to your current assignments." Nelson sensed that his supervisor was not open to new ideas, especially ones that challenged established protocols. Not easily discouraged, Nelson decided to approach the shipyard's chief welding engineer, a civilian contractor named Hartwell. He explained the potential benefits: significant time savings, reduced labor costs, and the elimination of scaffolding expenses. While Hartwell was more courteous than Morrison, he was equally dismissive. "Son," he replied kindly but firmly, "people much smarter than you and I have been trying to solve this very problem for 20 or more years. If it were that simple, someone would have already developed a solution." He continued, "Besides, the Navy has strict specifications. We can't just change procedures based on your ideas. You need approval from the Bureau of Ships in Washington, and that's a long process." Nelson understood that any change in official procedures required going through formal channels, involving extensive approval and compliance with regulations. Nevertheless, he remained convinced that his small innovation could make a significant difference, and he was determined to find a way to demonstrate its worth. The challenge now was not just technical but bureaucratic, as he navigated the complex machinery of naval standards and approvals, all the while believing that his idea held the potential to revolutionize naval welding practices if only given the chance. In the midst of ongoing studies and technological development, it became clear to many that rigorous prototype testing was an essential step, a process that could span several years. Such thorough testing was vital because only through careful validation could the innovations be reliably integrated into operational systems. However, time was a luxury that Nelson and his colleagues did not possess. This urgency was painfully evident as Nelson, with frustration mounting, voiced his concerns, insisting that submarines, an urgent military necessity, needed to be equipped with new technology immediately. Hartwell, the supervisor, responded with a nonchalant shrug, indicating that it was not his concern. His focus, he explained, was solely on the construction of vessels strictly adhering to the approved technical specifications. Nelson, feeling dismissed, pressed further, but Hartwell's stance remained unchanged. Nelson left the meeting seething with anger and disillusionment. Despite having proposed a method that could significantly cut down the development time, potentially saving thousands of hours per submarine, their response was dismissive. His idea was dismissed not because it lacked merit or feasibility; in fact, it was sound and promising. The problem was rooted in the fact that he was viewed merely as a welder, someone whose ideas were subordinate to bureaucratic procedures. Any procedural change required additional paperwork, approvals, and bureaucratic slowdowns, which the authorities prioritized over innovation. Refusing to be discouraged, Nelson decided to try a different approach. He authored a formal letter addressed to Captain Thomas Withers, the commanding officer of the shipyard. This letter was carefully crafted. It outlined the existing inefficiencies, presented his stud welding solution in detail, and estimated the potential time and cost savings that could be realized if his method was adopted. Following proper protocol, Nelson submitted his suggestion through the established channels, ensuring it was formally documented as a worker's recommendation. After a wait of 3 weeks, he received a standard, impersonal response, a form letter thanking him for his interest in enhancing the efficiency of the shipyard, along with a polite note that all technical proposals were subject to evaluation by the Bureau of Ships Engineering Review Board. The letter explained that his suggestion had been forwarded for consideration, but it also clarified that the review process typically took from 18 to 24 months. By that time, the outcome of the war might already have been decided, either won or lost. Frustrated and disappointed, Nelson crumpled the letter and cast it into the waste bin, feeling despondent over the indifference to his innovative ideas. That evening, driven by a newfound resolve, Nelson made a pivotal decision that would not only change his own life but might forever alter the course of naval history. He resolved that if the Navy refused to listen to his ideas, he would build a working prototype himself, an independent demonstration that his concept truly worked. His goal was to demonstrate its viability so convincingly that the Navy would be compelled to recognize its worth and adopt the technology. With that determination fueling his actions, Nelson began clearing space in his small garage located behind his modest cottage in Vallejo. His wife, Emma, watched him with concern, noticing the collection of scrap steel and welding equipment appearing in their home. She warned him, "Ted, you're going to get yourself fired if you keep this up. You're supposed to be working on official Navy projects, not pursuing your own inventions." Despite her worries, Nelson reassured her, "This will help the Navy in the end. They just don't realize it yet." Over the following weeks, often working late into the night and on weekends, Nelson set about constructing his first prototype of a stud welding gun. The design was rough but functional, comprising a pistol grip handle for easy operation, a spring-loaded plunger to hold and press the stud securely against the material, an electrical trigger connected to a powerful welding supply, and a quick-release mechanism to load new studs swiftly. The most crucial innovation was the flux cap, a component essential for initiating a stable arc. Nelson experimented with various ceramic materials, tested multiple flux compositions, and refined different cap designs. Dozens of trials later, he finally developed a flux cap that could hold the flux securely, facilitate proper arc initiation, and be manufactured at a low cost. By May in the year 1941, Nelson had succeeded in creating a fully functioning prototype. He put it to the test, applying the device to scrap steel in every conceivable position, horizontal, vertical, overhead, and at various angles, challenging its reliability and performance. The prototype responded well, demonstrating promising results that hinted at a breakthrough in welding technology. In a matter of moments, the unassuming welding device operated flawlessly, performing its task with remarkable efficiency. A single stud could be securely welded in less than 1 second, a feat that dramatically surpassed traditional methods. The strength of this weld was not just comparable but actually exceeded the robustness of conventional through bolts, and perhaps most impressively, it accomplished all this without requiring access to the underside of the surface being worked on. To showcase his innovation, Nelson brought his prototype directly to his workplace, demonstrating its capabilities during a casual lunch break to a group of fellow welders. Their reactions were immediate and enthusiastic. They saw the potential and expressed their excitement about the possibilities. One worker remarked aloud then and there how this invention could save countless hours of labor, emphasizing its efficiency. Another suggested that Nelson should present his device to Morrison, believing that the project deserved further attention. Nelson, however, shook his head, revealing that he had already shown Morrison and that his interest had been lacking. "He wasn't interested," Nelson explained, "so I quit and started considering my own options." A seasoned welder then offered a bold suggestion, urging Nelson to sell his welding gun to shipyards all across the country. With such widespread adoption, he could potentially earn a fortune. This idea had not previously crossed Nelson's mind, He was fundamentally a welder, not a businessman, and he lacked initial capital, manufacturing facilities, or experience in managing a business enterprise. Despite these obstacles, Nelson's conviction in the potential of his invention grew stronger. He reasoned that if the Navy was uninterested, private shipbuilding yards might be eager to adopt his technology. The timing appeared promising. The Kaiser shipyards in Richmond were actively recruiting, and Bethlehem Steel's shipyard in San Francisco was expanding rapidly. Numerous other shipyards lined the coastal regions, all grappling with similar labor shortages and production headaches. On June the 20th, the year being 1941, Nelson decided to take a decisive step, resigning from his position at Mare Island Naval Shipyard. His supervisor made a sincere effort to dissuade him, warning that Nelson's skills as a welder were valuable and that abandoning a steady job for an unproven invention was risky. Still, Nelson remained resolute. "I am going to build welding guns," he declared to Morrison, "and when the Navy comes back asking to purchase them, I hope you remember this conversation." He left the shipyard with only $11 in his pocket, a garage full of tools, and a firm belief that his invention would eventually find success. Following his departure, Nelson established the Nelson Specialty Welding Equipment Corporation on the 1st of July, 1941. To fund his venture, he secured a loan of $95,000 from the Reconstruction Finance Corporation, a government agency created during the Great Depression specifically to support small businesses. With this capital, he rented a modest workshop in Vallejo and began producing his revolutionary stud welding guns. The early months were fraught with difficulties. He had no existing customers, no brand reputation, and no established distribution channels. Nelson spent much of his time visiting local machine shops and small fabrication firms, demonstrating his welding gun and explaining how much time it could save. Many of these potential clients were skeptical at first, hesitant to abandon traditional methods. Nevertheless, a few forward-thinking companies saw enough potential to test the device with demonstration units. Over time, modest sales began to materialize. By September of 1941, Nelson had sold 18 welding guns and a few thousand flux-capped studs, marking his initial steps toward establishing a foothold in the industry. However, everything changed dramatically on the 7th of December, 1941. The surprise attack on Pearl Harbor by the Japanese military resulted in the destruction or damage of 8 battleships, 3 cruisers, 3 destroyers, and nearly 200 aircraft. The loss of life was staggering, with over 2,430 Americans killed. This catastrophic event propelled the United States into a full-scale war that demanded urgent and massive shipbuilding efforts. Shipyards that had been operating at capacity suddenly found themselves overwhelmed with the need to produce ships rapidly. The shipbuilding industry responded with unprecedented urgency. The Kaiser shipyards in Richmond ramped up their production of Liberty ships at a remarkable pace, while Mare Island Naval Shipyard received emergency orders to construct submarines and other vessels essential for the war effort. Private companies like Bethlehem Steel and other major shipbuilders found themselves plunged into what could only be described as a frenzy of activity, all directed toward supporting national security and victory. Nelson's once small venture suddenly became part of a much larger war effort, its potential impact now vital to the country's survival. Yards across the country had suddenly switched to working in triple shifts, and every single one of these facilities was grappling with a common challenge: how to produce ships at a pace fast enough to meet wartime demands. The conventional manufacturing techniques, which had served well in peacetime, now proved painfully inadequate. They were too slow, excessively labor-intensive, and wasted valuable time that could be better utilized in speeding up production. Amid this urgent need, Ted Nelson's phone started ringing off the hook. Just a few weeks prior, many of his innovations had been dismissed or ignored by shipyard managers, but now, the tide had turned. The purchasing agents at major shipyards, who had once shown little interest, suddenly wanted to place large orders for his equipment. The Kaiser shipyards, one of the largest and most prominent in the country, ordered 50 welding guns along with 10,000 studs. Bethlehem Steel, another giant in the industry, placed an order for 40 guns. Even the Mare Island Naval Shipyard, where Nelson had been turned down just months earlier, now submitted an order for 60 guns and 20,000 studs. This sequence of events was handled efficiently by Morrison, Nelson's former supervisor, who took charge of processing the requisitions. There was no apology or acknowledgement of the earlier dismissals, just a straightforward order and a request for rapid delivery. The momentum was unmistakable. By January of 1942, less than a month after the attack on Pearl Harbor, Nelson's small workshop was overwhelmed by demand. His existing production capacity could no longer keep pace with the mounting orders. The situation had become urgent. Nelson was receiving orders faster than he could produce the items. He quickly realized that he needed a much larger, more robust manufacturing facility, with additional skilled workers and upgraded equipment. Without delay, he leased a bigger space in San Leandro, a town just a few miles south of Oakland. The new factory was located in an unassuming building set amidst a cornfield, remote and modest in appearance. Yet, it offered the essential qualities he needed: ample space, sufficient electrical power, and the capacity for future expansion. By March of 1942, Nelson had hired 20 workers. Fast forward to June, and the workforce had grown to 50. By the time September arrived, the number of employees had increased further to 150. The plant operated tirelessly, 7 days a week, around the clock, delivering welding guns at a rate of 30 units each day, while stud production soared into the thousands daily. Almost overnight, every major shipyard along the West Coast was utilizing Nelson's stud welding technology, and the reports streaming back were astonishing. One example was the installation of submarine decks, which, under traditional methods, required 12 workers spanning 6 days. With Nelson's welders, the same task could now be completed by just 3 workers in a single day. The elimination of scaffolding not only sped up the process but also saved an additional 2 days, freeing up workers to concentrate on other critical tasks. The quality of the welds surpassed traditional bolted connections. Wooden deck planks could be more easily removed and replaced during maintenance or repairs, facilitating faster turnaround times. At Mare Island Naval Shipyard, military officials noted a dramatic acceleration in submarine construction. Between 1941 and 1945, the yard completed 17 submarines, with each vessel's construction time steadily decreasing as Nelson's welding techniques became integrated into the process. Although stud welding was a vital innovation, it was only one element in a broader effort to boost efficiency. By mid-1942, the technology was being employed far beyond deck attachment. It was now pivotal in dozens of applications such as pipe hangers, cable supports, equipment mounts, and bulkhead attachments. Essentially, in any situation where steel components needed to be fastened swiftly and securely, stud welding proved to be the perfect solution. Initially, the Navy Bureau of Ships had ignored Nelson's proposals. However, as evidence of the technique's effectiveness accumulated, they turned their attention to studying it more thoroughly. Engineering teams conducted rigorous analyses of weld strength, durability, and failure modes. The results confirmed what Nelson had long suspected. His welds were not only faster to produce but also stronger and more reliable than traditional methods. By the 19th of November in the year 1942, just 11 months after he had left a modest job earning $11 a day, Nelson had transformed the landscape of shipbuilding, turning his once dismissed idea into a critical component of wartime production. In the midst of his diligent work on welding innovations, Ted Nelson was unexpectedly visited by a delegation of United States Navy officers. Without any prior warning, 5 men dressed in formal naval uniforms arrived at his plant located in San Leandro. The officer leading the delegation, Captain Harrison, who represented the Bureau of Ships, took charge of the conversation. "Mr. Nelson," Captain Harrison began in a tone that was both respectful and official, "we are here to officially inform you that the Navy has completed a thorough evaluation of your stud welding process. After careful review, we have concluded that your technological breakthrough has contributed to an incredible saving of approximately 5 million man-hours for the U.S. Navy. These savings have been realized through the construction of submarines and surface ships over the past 10 months. The captain's voice carried both admiration and acknowledgement of the significant impact. He paused momentarily before adding, "It is anticipated that this number will increase considerably as more shipyards adopt your welding technology and integrate it into their manufacturing lines." Then, with a tone that conveyed both recognition and formality, Captain Harrison continued, "On behalf of the Secretary of the Navy and the entire United States government, I am authorized to present you with a citation recognizing your exceptional contribution to the national war effort." Ted Nelson found himself momentarily stunned. It was a surreal contrast to memories of earlier rejection. The Navy had previously dismissed his ideas, disregarded his proposals, and forced him to leave his previous job. He had risked everything, his reputation, his future, simply to prove that his innovation worked. Now, they were awarding him a formal citation. Captain Harrison, perhaps noticing the conflicted look on Nelson's face, offered a reassuring explanation. "Mr. Nelson, I understand you submitted a proposal to Mare Island early in 1941. I've reviewed the files on that submission. Unfortunately, at that time, your proposal was not properly evaluated, and that was a mistake. I want to apologize on behalf of the Navy for that oversight." He paused thoughtfully before adding, "Your decision to develop this technology independently, outside the standard procurement channels, has led to a quicker deployment that might not have been possible otherwise. Sometimes, the most effective way to serve your country is to bypass bureaucratic obstacles and focus directly on solving the core problem." Nelson received the citation with a complex mixture of emotions. He felt an overwhelming sense of pride in what he had achieved and found vindication for his perseverance through years of doubt and rejection. Yet, alongside that pride, there was a lingering frustration at the bureaucratic hurdles that had nearly prevented this innovation from coming to fruition. The ongoing war was relentless, with the demands on production mounting daily. In response to these escalating needs, Nelson's company continued to grow, expanding its operations once more. By March of 1943, they had opened a second manufacturing plant, this time in Camden, New Jersey. This facility on the East Coast supplied shipyards in large naval hubs such as New York, Philadelphia, Norfolk, and Charleston. By mid-1943, Nelson Specialty Welding Equipment Corporation employed over 400 workers and was generating an annual revenue approaching $4 million. Ted Nelson himself remained deeply involved, working 16 hours every day at the factory, often dressed in the same tan pants and shirts typically worn by shop workers. His modest monthly salary of $1,000 remained unchanged, and all profits were reinvested into expanding the plant, acquiring new equipment, and repaying loans. Despite the grueling hours and modest salary, Ted Nelson's influence on the war effort was enormous. The Navy's initial estimate that his process had saved 5 million man-hours by late 1942 was only the beginning. As the war intensified and stud welding became an integral part of naval construction, the true scope of its impact expanded exponentially. By 1943, stud welding was no longer confined to submarines. It had become a standard technique for assembling aircraft carriers, battleships, cruisers, destroyers, and scores of smaller vessels. For example, the Essex-class aircraft carriers, which were being constructed by Newport News Shipbuilding and numerous other yards, relied heavily on Nelson's stud welding technique for attaching flight decks and interior fittings. The extensive use of his welding technology sped up construction times and improved the strength and durability of these vital ships, further accelerating the Navy's war readiness. As each new vessel was built, it became clear that Nelson's innovation had indeed transformed naval fabrication. His persistent efforts and unyielding dedication not only contributed significantly to the war effort but also set new standards for manufacturing practices across the shipbuilding industry. This quiet yet revolutionary engineering breakthrough exemplified how perseverance, combined with technical genius, could dramatically change the course of history during a time of global conflict. During the extensive efforts of World War II, the United States military and industrial complex required an astonishing number of components to support its naval fleet, totaling roughly 20,000 studs per vessel. The Navy's production of aircraft carriers during the war exemplifies this massive scale, with the construction of 24 Essex-class carriers serving as a testament to the industrial capacity of the period. These carriers, among the largest and most significant ships of the time, relied heavily on stud welding technology to ensure fast, reliable attachment of various structural elements. The Iowa-class battleships, renowned for their formidable firepower and size, employed stud welding in multiple critical areas such as deck planking, equipment mounts, and armor attachment points. Similarly, the Baltimore-class heavy cruisers integrated this innovative technology across their entire design, benefiting from the same efficiency and strength. The technology's influence extended to smaller but equally essential vessels such as destroyer escorts, landing ships, and patrol boats, where faster assembly processes and more robust connections played a crucial role in meeting wartime demands. However, the most profound transformation brought about by stud welding was clearly evident in the domain of submarine construction. The Mayer Island Naval Shipyard, a facility where Nelson's pioneering ideas had once met initial rejection, experienced a dramatic turnaround to become one of the most efficient submarine manufacturing centers worldwide. Over the course of the war, this shipyard constructed 17 submarines, each with progressively shortened build times thanks to the implementation of advanced welding techniques, notably stud welding. In comparison, the Port South Naval Shipyard in New Hampshire emerged as the leading submarine producer during the war, completing a total of 79 submarines between July of 1940 and July of 1945. The remarkable success of Port South was built on a combination of innovations, among which stud welding played a pivotal role. The yard adopted Nelson's system extensively, applying it not only to deck construction but also throughout the interior of each vessel, leading to significant reductions in assembly time and improvements in structural integrity. These innovations resulted in noteworthy construction statistics that set new records for efficiency. One of the most striking achievements occurred on January 27, 1944, when Port South launched 4 submarines simultaneously, the redfish, ronqual, razorback, and scabbardfish, a feat unmatched in naval history. This extraordinary event was a culmination of the yard's intensified manufacturing capabilities. During the peak year of 1944, Portsmouth managed to complete 32 submarines, averaging roughly one submarine every 11 days, a staggering pace that underscored the efficiency of their processes. The submarines produced at Portsmouth, primarily of the Baltimore class that comprised the bulk of wartime submarine production, typically took about 12 months from the laying of the keel to commissioning. In comparison, this period was several months shorter than comparable ships built at other yards, highlighting the significant time savings achieved through innovative construction methods like stud welding. Elsewhere, the Electric Boat Company located in Groton, Connecticut, contributed with the construction of 74 submarines during the war, while Mantarock Shipbuilding in Wisconsin, although situated hundreds of miles inland on the Great Lakes, innovatively floated 28 submarines down the Mississippi River to reach the Gulf of Mexico, showcasing the resourcefulness of American wartime industry. Across all production sites, the United States built a total of 203 submarines during the conflict, each requiring thousands of individual stud-welded attachments. Every single stud represented not just a secure connection but also a critical time-saving element. Each saved minute of labor multiplied across thousands, and then hundreds of submarines, leading to enormous cumulative savings in construction time and industrial capacity. Yet submarines constituted only a portion of the wartime production volume. The greater scale of manufacturing lay in surface vessels and merchant ships, notably the Liberty ships. Mass-produced cargo carriers operated largely by Kaiser shipyards under the auspices of the Maritime Commission. It was during this period that approximately 2,710 Liberty ships were built, each incorporating between 5,000 and 8,000 stud-welded attachments which secured deck planking, cargo handling equipment, defensive gun mounts, and various fittings. The design improvements introduced with the Victory ships, a faster and more advanced variant of the Liberty class, followed similar construction standards, further amplifying the scale of production. The wartime industrial effort reached unprecedented levels of human achievement, particularly in 2043, when American shipyards launched an astonishing pace of 3 ships every single day, equating to 75 ships each month and an incredible 900 ships annually for that year. In sum, the wartime mobilization of naval and merchant shipping was characterized by the widespread adoption of stud welding technology, which significantly accelerated the building process, strengthened the vessels, and allowed the United States to meet the enormous logistical demands of the conflict with remarkable efficiency and speed. The remarkable advancements realized in shipbuilding during this period were made possible only through a series of groundbreaking innovations in construction techniques. These encompassed pre-fabrication processes, the development of modular assembly lines, the deployment of specialized labor forces, the utilization of dedicated tools, and the implementation of faster, more efficient attachment methods. Among these, stud welding emerged as a key element within a broader revolutionary movement aimed at significantly enhancing the efficiency of naval construction. While it was just one component of a larger transformation, it proved to be a fundamentally important one. The introduction of this technique allowed for the rapid elimination of scaffolding, a traditionally time-consuming part of ship assembly. This freed workers from tedious, labor-intensive setups, enabling them to focus on more critical tasks during the building process. The impact of these innovations on the pace of assembly was profound. The quick and secure attachment of construction elements drastically shortened the time needed to complete ships. Moreover, the welds produced through this method were not only rapid but also possessed exceptional strength and reliability, ensuring that these hastily assembled vessels could withstand the treacherous conditions of North Atlantic storms, as well as withstand potential enemy attacks. By the spring of the year 1943, the United States Navy had officially recognized Nelson's influential contributions to this revolutionary shift in shipbuilding practices. On the 11th of May in 1943, the Secretary of the Navy formally honored Nelson's organization, the Nelson Specialty Welding Equipment Corporation, by awarding it the prestigious Army-Navy E Award for Excellence in Production. This award was established in July of the previous year, 1942, specifically to acknowledge manufacturing entities that demonstrated extraordinary performance in the production of war equipment. The criteria for this recognition centered on outstanding quality and production quantity, with only about 5% of all companies involved in wartime manufacturing attaining such an honor. The award itself consisted of a pennant to be displayed at the factory, symbolizing the achievement, along with individual pins distributed to all employees, small tokens of appreciation for their collective efforts. The awarding ceremony took place at the Nelson plant located in San Leandro and was conducted with full military honors, drawing attendance from Navy officers, Army representatives, and local officials. The factory workers, Nelson's dedicated employees, many of whom had endured grueling schedules to meet the pressing demands of wartime production, received their pins with a deep sense of pride and accomplishment. During the event, Ted Nelson, standing before his workforce dressed in his usual working attire, accepted the pennant and delivered a succinct speech. He emphasized that their efforts were not driven by the lure of awards or personal recognition. Instead, their motivation stemmed from a profound sense of duty to their country. He expressed that every stud welded and every gun produced contributed directly to the safe return of sailors and soldiers from combat zones, serving as the most meaningful reward they could receive. Yet, the Navy's recognition of Nelson's team did not end with the initial award. In accordance with wartime recognition protocols, plants that maintained their exceptional performance levels for at least 6 months after receiving the initial E award were eligible for additional honors, specifically, a star added to their pennant as a symbol of sustained excellence. The Nelson Company earned its first star in November of 1943 and a second star in May of 1944, cementing its status as one of the most outstanding wartime manufacturers. By the conclusion of hostilities, the Nelson Specialty Welding Equipment Corporation had achieved the rare distinction of earning 2 E awards, each adorned with stars, signifying continued excellence over an extended period. Only a handful of other companies managed to reach this milestone. Official citations highlighted the enormous amount of time saved in naval construction as a key achievement, an estimated 50 million man-hours. To grasp the magnitude of this figure, consider that 50 million hours equate to roughly 5,700 years. If a single individual worked 8 hours every day without interruption, it would take over 19,000 years to accumulate such a number of hours. This staggering time saving was made possible through a straightforward but ingenious innovation: a spring-loaded welding gun equipped with a ceramic flux cap. This simple yet effective device dramatically accelerated the process of attaching structural components to ships, enabling a faster turnaround from construction to deployment. The resulting increase in speed translated into tangible strategic advantages. More submarines could be launched to hunt Japanese convoys, additional destroyers could escort vital supply routes, and more aircraft carriers could be launched to project power across vast oceans. Landing ships could arrive sooner on hostile beaches, delivering troops and supplies in a timely manner. Ultimately, every day shaved off the building process contributed directly to enhanced combat readiness, increased logistical support, and the saving of countless lives on the front lines. The consequences of Nelson's innovative approach to welding technology extended far beyond its immediate industrial applications, revealing benefits that were both surprising and transformative. Central to this was the realization that the stud welding process required significantly less skill to operate effectively than traditional methods such as bolt fastening or conventional arc welding. This ease of use meant that with only minimal instruction, new workers could learn to perform stud welding tasks safely and efficiently, opening the door for rapid workforce expansion during a time of urgent need. This development proved particularly critical as the war effort intensified and labor shortages across various industries became more acute. The urgency to produce ships and military equipment on an unprecedented scale led to a dramatic influx of workers into the shipyards, especially women. These women entered the industrial workforce in exceptional numbers, symbolized famously by Rosie the Riveter, an emblem of female strength and capability. Yet many others also contributed, including welders like Wendy, who specialized in the new stud welding techniques. Women in the shipyards took on roles that were vital to the construction process. Operating stud welding guns, installing deck planking, and mounting essential equipment throughout the vessels. Many of these women quickly became highly skilled at these new techniques, demonstrating adaptability and technical prowess. At its peak, the Mayer Island Naval Shipyard employed nearly 50,000 workers, of which approximately 9,000 were women. Similarly, Kaiser shipyards employed hundreds of thousands of workers, with women constituting nearly 30% of the total workforce, highlighting the significant reliance on female labor for war production. Given the rapid pace of production needed to meet wartime demands, these workers required tools and processes that could be learned efficiently and operated safely without extensive training. Stud welding perfectly suited these criteria, enabling the large-scale manufacturing efforts to proceed swiftly and reliably. This technological advantage, seemingly small in the broader context, contributed substantially to the overall industrial output. By the year 1944, the tide of the Second World War had decisively turned in favor of the Allied powers. American industrial strength, in particular, overwhelmed the capabilities of the Axis nations. The United States produced a staggering number of war materials, more ships, aircraft, tanks, and firearms than Germany and Japan combined, culminating in what President Franklin D. Roosevelt famously termed the arsenal of democracy, which operated at maximum capacity. Ted Nelson's stud welding guns, while just one element of this immense industrial complex, played their part in this victory. In wartime, seemingly small innovations can have a profound impact because efficiency directly correlates with lives saved and battles won. Quicker construction of ships and military equipment enabled the United States to project its naval power more rapidly and effectively, which in turn meant that more Japanese shipping was sunk, more islands were captured, and the pressure on enemy forces was increased profoundly. This strategic advantage was most clearly demonstrated in the Pacific submarine campaign. American submarines sank over 1,000 Japanese merchant ships, amounting to roughly 5 million tons of shipping, as well as damaging and sinking significant naval targets, including 1 aircraft carrier, 8 battleships, and numerous cruisers and destroyers. This success was largely made possible because the United States could build submarines at a faster rate than Japan could sink them. Despite Japan entering the war with a larger submarine fleet, by the end of the conflict, Japan had completed only 126 submarines, whereas America had manufactured 203, an enormous difference that underscored the importance of rapid construction. Every month that a new submarine was added to the fleet meant another week of extended pursuit and destruction of enemy shipping lanes. The accelerated production allowed the United States Navy to maintain a consistent advantage at sea, ensuring a steady flow of new vessels to replace losses and keep the pressure mounting on Japanese maritime logistics. A similar pattern was observable in the construction of aircraft carriers, particularly those of the Essex class. In December of 1941, the U.S. Navy had only 7 aircraft carriers of all types. By August of 1945, this number had skyrocketed to 99, with the Essex-class fleet forming the core of this impressive expansion. These armored workhorses, numbering 24, each carried up to 90 aircraft and became the backbone of U.S. naval strength. From mid-1943 onward, these carriers spearheaded the dominant American naval task forces in the Pacific theater. The Essex carriers were instrumental in aerial and naval battles, shelling Japanese positions, launching widespread airstrikes against enemy bases, providing essential air cover during amphibious landings, and engaging Japanese naval forces in decisive battles. Their effectiveness was most famously demonstrated during the Battle of the Philippine Sea in June of 1944, where American carrier-based aircraft destroyed over 600 Japanese planes in what pilots called the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a turning point that marked Japanese air power's near collapse. Through these achievements, it is clear that the innovations in welding technology, the strategic mobilization of a vast and diverse workforce, and the relentless pace of military production all played pivotal roles in the Allied victory. Together, these elements exemplified how small technological advances, combined with organizational ingenuity, the outcome of this remarkable victory was largely due to a crucial strategic advantage: America's possession of a significantly greater number of aircraft carriers positioned precisely where they were needed most. This logistical edge was further amplified by rapid construction efforts, which made it possible to deploy these vessels and supporting craft with remarkable speed. The monumental D-Day invasion of Normandy, executed on June 6 in the year 1944, exemplified this massive multinational effort, involving the deployment of roughly 7,000 ships and landing craft. This formidable armada, which stands out as the largest amphibious assault in human history, was made feasible primarily through the relentless efforts of American and British shipyards that labored tirelessly to produce thousands upon thousands of landing craft. These vessels, though fairly simple in design, featured flat bottoms to facilitate easy movement onto beaches and rapid unloading of their cargo. Their construction was characterized by a need for swift fabrication combined with dependable fittings that could withstand the rigors of multiple landings under combat conditions. To meet these demands, stud welding technology proved to be an ideal solution in the manufacturing process of landing crafts and their components. The ability to quickly and securely attach cargo ramps, davit mounts, and deck fittings was essential, and the robust and efficient nature of stud welding made this possible. The innovative welding techniques initially developed by a pioneering engineer for attaching decks on submarines found an important new application in the assembly of large numbers of landing crafts, streamlining the entire production process and ensuring the vessel's structural integrity. Following the official end of hostilities in Europe with victory in Europe, Day in May of 1945, the focus of military manufacturing shifted entirely toward preparations for the Pacific theater. The anticipated invasion of Japan, known as Operation Downfall, was planned for November of that same year. This campaign, set to be the most extensive in history, would require an unprecedented number of ships, landing craft, and extensive logistical support to sustain operations across vast distances. Shipyards swiftly ramped up their preparations, anticipating an enormous surge in production to meet the demands of the upcoming invasion. However, this plan was abruptly rendered unnecessary when, on August the 6th and 9th in the year 1945, atomic bombs were dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. The unprecedented destruction prompted Japan's surrender, culminating in the formal announcement on August the 15th that World War II had finally come to an end. With the war's conclusion, the vast machinery of military production swiftly began to wind down. Contracts that had previously fueled relentless manufacturing suddenly became void, compelling many workers to face layoffs. Many shipyards either closed entirely or transitioned to peacetime production, focusing on commercial and civilian projects. In this rapidly changing environment, the Nelson Specialty Welding Equipment Corporation found itself facing considerable uncertainty. Once employing over 400 workers at its peak, the company confronted the stark possibility of collapse as military orders vanished almost overnight. However, Ted Nelson, the company's visionary leader, had been proactive in considering the post-war landscape well before the war's end. During the war years, he had explored avenues for applying stud welding technology beyond its initial military-centric uses, envisioning a future in civilian industries. His insight recognized that steel fabrication for any industry, be it construction, bridges, building frameworks, tanks, pressure vessels, or automotive manufacturing, would benefit significantly from faster, more reliable attachment methods that stud welding could provide. Seizing this opportunity, Nelson pivoted his company's focus toward the burgeoning civilian market. He actively promoted his stud welding systems to construction firms, steel fabricators, and various industrial manufacturers seeking to modernize and expedite their fabrication processes. The post-war boom in America's infrastructure development, driving the construction of highways, bridges, skyscrapers, and suburban neighborhoods, created a wealth of opportunities for steel attachment and fabrication, precisely the sectors where Nelson's technology could make a difference. By the year 1948, Nelson's company had successfully transformed its operations to cater exclusively to peacetime markets. Although smaller in scale compared to the company's wartime production levels, the business was now stable, growing steadily, and innovating continually. The company developed new stud designs, advanced welding guns, and created specialized applications tailored to diverse industrial needs. In the year 1950, Nelson made a pivotal decision, selling his company to TRW, a major industrial conglomerate at the time. This sale not only provided Nelson with financial security but also marked his retirement from active management of the business. Despite the change in ownership, the Nelson name remained prominently associated with the product line, as TRW continued to market Nelson's pioneering stud welding equipment. The brand recognition that Nelson had built over years of innovation persisted, ensuring that his legacy continued to be evident within the industry. Over the subsequent decades, the company experienced changes in ownership and corporate structure, but the core technology and reputation established by Nelson's original enterprise remained integral to its identity. The shift from wartime to peacetime industry, driven by ingenuity and strategic foresight, exemplified how a technological innovation could pivot from military necessity to become a vital component of a nation's. The story of Ted Nelson's groundbreaking invention in the field of welding is one marked by resilience, innovation, and enduring influence that spans decades. Over the years, the Nelson brand has experienced numerous ownership changes. Initially, the company was sold to Farsantech Incorporated in the year 2000, marking a new chapter in its history. Later, in 2007, it was acquired by Doncasters Group Limited, which continued to oversee its operations. Then, in 2018, the industrial division was purchased by Stanley Black & Decker, a global leader in tools and industrial solutions. Despite these multiple transitions in ownership and management, the Nelson brand steadfastly persisted, its legacy remaining vibrant and relevant. Today, Stanley Engineered Fastening continues to produce and distribute Nelson stud welding products on a worldwide scale. The technological foundation laid by Ted Nelson himself, in his modest garage in Vallejo, continues to serve industries across the globe. Modern stud welding has undoubtedly grown more advanced than Nelson's original design. The evolution of this technology includes the introduction of inverter power supplies, which afford incredibly precise control over the welding arc. Automated systems have taken over much of the high-volume production process, increasing efficiency and consistency. In contemporary manufacturing plants, robotic welders now apply studs with rapidity and consistency, especially in automobile assembly lines. However, despite these technological advancements, the core principles of Nelson's invention remain unchanged. A stud, a flux cap, a spring-loaded gun, and an electrical arc, all working together to complete a weld in roughly 1 second per stud. The applications of Nelson's invention have extended far beyond its initial naval military use, with many industries now harnessing its power. In modern construction, stud welding is used extensively to attach metal decking securely to steel beams in the construction of skyscrapers. Bridge builders rely on it for fixing guardrail posts and mounting lighting fixtures with ease and reliability. In the realm of nuclear power generation, the technology is employed for securing cable trays and supporting essential equipment. In the automotive industry, stud welding plays a critical role within vehicle bodies, serving functions such as grounding points or fastening trim components. Its versatility and speed have made it indispensable in a wide spectrum of contexts. The genesis of Nelson's welding process relates back to a problem faced during naval construction, yet the significance of his innovation transcends naval and shipbuilding industries. Today, the impact of his invention is evident across sectors involving large-scale steel fabrication and restoration. In particular, the preservation and restoration of historic ships bear witness to the technology's legacy. The battleship Texas, one of just 7 remaining vessels that served in both World War I and World War II, is currently undergoing comprehensive restoration in a dry dock facility. The process involves repairing corroded hull plates and replacing deteriorated fittings, tasks made significantly easier thanks to modern Nelson stud welding equipment. Using the same technique Ted Nelson developed nearly 80 years ago, the restoration team can securely attach new steel plates, ensuring the ship's structural integrity and historical authenticity. Similarly, the submarine USS Pompanito, a World War II vessel now meticulously preserved as a museum ship in San Francisco, employs Nelson stud welding for ongoing maintenance and repairs. This submarine, which sits at the Embarcadero and welcomes over 100,000 visitors annually, undergoes constant upkeep to remain safe and operational. The use of Nelson equipment allows volunteer restoration crews to perform welding tasks efficiently, often without the need for highly certified welders on every assignment, thereby facilitating preservation efforts that might otherwise be prohibitively labor-intensive and costly. Ted Nelson lived to witness the profound impact of his invention, a realization that must have filled him with pride. The day he sketched his idea in a notebook in 1941, he could hardly have anticipated that his small garage project would evolve into a global standard. His invention became widely adopted in shipbuilding, transforming the method of joining steel structures. Over time, it found its way into countless other industries around the world, establishing a new norm for fastening and assembly methods. Nelson's name became synonymous with a process that revolutionized manufacturing, cutting down man-hours and improving structural reliability. He passed away in 1994 at the age of 89, having lived to see the Cold War come to an end, and witnessing the profound transformation of the world his generation fought to preserve. While statistics around Nelson's achievements provide some insight into his legacy, saving upwards of 50 million man-hours, earning 2 prestigious Army-Navy awards, facilitating the faster construction of thousands of ships, and billions of studs manufactured, they only hint at the full scope of his influence. Numbers, after all, cannot fully capture the depth of his impact, which resides in the countless steel structures strengthened, the ships restored to their former glory, and the industries transformed by his ingenuity. Behind these achievements lies a story of vision, perseverance, and the pursuit of solutions that continue to resonate and inspire to this day. The true measures of his achievement, and not the accolades or public acknowledgement. Nelson's story exemplifies a core principle of innovation: the resolve to pursue an idea relentlessly, regardless of skepticism or bureaucratic rejection. Unlike many who might have succumbed to discouragement, he refused to accept the status quo or be deterred by the dismissive attitude of critics. Instead, Nelson took decisive action. He left his job, invested his own savings, and demonstrated definitively that his concept could work. Once his invention proved successful, the market itself recognized its value and responded accordingly. This willingness to take personal risks and to quietly push forward without waiting for official approval underscores a fundamental trait of American ingenuity: the proactive pursuit of solutions without unnecessary delay or bureaucratic permission. This relentless spirit of innovation does not conform to traditional procedures or rely solely on institutional approval. It begins with a clear identification of a specific problem, followed by the courageous development of a practical solution, and culminates in the readiness to implement that solution despite potential resistance. For example, during the shipyard's long history, it played a vital role in constructing and repairing naval vessels, including the USS Drum, a nuclear submarine, the last of its kind built in California, which was launched in the year 1970. The shipyard's importance was recognized officially in 1960, when it was declared a California Historical Landmark, and several of its buildings, including dry docks and industrial structures, received the designation of a National Historic Landmark District 25 years later. Over the course of its more than a century of operation, the yard was instrumental in producing hundreds of ships and restoring thousands more. Its work in building an impressive number of submarines, from the first to the last, remains a testament to decades of dedicated industrial effort. Today, the old shipyard has transitioned from a military-industrial complex into a site for commercial and residential redevelopment. Many of the historic structures, such as the chapel, dry docks, and various industrial buildings, have been preserved, allowing visitors to walk through a space once bustling with frantic activity during the war years. During those times, tens of thousands of workers labored around the clock, building submarines that contributed significantly to the war effort. One notable site within this complex is Building 46, the former pipe shop that served until 1984. It has now been transformed into a small museum, featuring tools, photographs, and artifacts from the shipyard's extensive history. Interestingly, there is no dedicated exhibit or monument specifically honoring Ted Nelson, the welder whose ingenuity saved approximately 50 million man-hours of labor, an achievement that is mostly forgotten outside the narrow circles of welding professionals and maritime historians. Yet, Nelson's anonymity likely posed no real concern for him. His focus was never fame or recognition, but rather solving a pressing problem, making processes more efficient, and contributing to the overall war effort. He was driven by purpose and conviction, not by the desire for accolades. The success of his solution, that it worked, that it resulted in significant time and lives saved, and that it brought about meaningful change within an industry, proved his point more powerfully than any ceremony could. In the end, Nelson's story stands as a quintessential example of American innovation at its best. It reminds us that impactful progress often comes from individuals willing to challenge existing norms, risk failure, and act decisively. His efforts exemplify the spirit of someone who sees a problem clearly, develops a solution with ingenuity and perseverance, and then implements it quietly but effectively, regardless of institutional resistance or skepticism. It's this mindset that continues to define the American approach to technological and social advancement. A relentless pursuit of progress driven by conviction, ingenuity, and the unwavering belief that change is possible when one is willing to take the first courageous step. The reward is undeniable, yet it also offers a crucial lesson that resonates across all generations. Historically, breakthroughs and innovations tend to emerge not from the corridors of credentialed expertise, but from the hands of everyday workers who face everyday problems and instinctively know how to resolve them. They do not always appear in the polished halls of corporate research laboratories. Instead, they often originate in humble garage workshops where inventors and tinkerers experiment tirelessly, testing ideas until solutions finally take shape. Such innovations rarely follow the expected path through official channels. Instead, they come from individuals willing to risk everything on a concept they deeply believe to be right, even if others dismiss it as improbable or unworthy of pursuit. The next revolutionary idea could very well originate from a welder working in a shipyard, a mechanic tinkering in a garage, a nurse tending to patients in a hospital, or a teacher conducting lessons in a classroom. It could come from someone whom authorities or bureaucratic systems deem unqualified, or from someone whom officials advise should strictly adhere to rigid procedures. They might be dismissed by experts who claim their efforts are a waste of time on what's perceived as an impossible challenge, yet history demonstrates that paying close attention to these unsheltered voices can lead to the most transformative changes. This is not to suggest that every idea advocated by such individuals will succeed, but rather that the rare one which does work can alter the course of history. Take, for example, Ted Nelson's invention involving a ceramic flux cap, a small ceramic piece that seemed insignificant at first glance. His welding gun was a straightforward spring-loaded device, nothing extraordinary there. Yet, when these two simple components worked together, they drastically improved efficiency in shipbuilding, eliminating much of the need for scaffolding, thereby saving time and reducing risks to workers. Specifically, during a pivotal period in history, Nelson's innovation contributed to saving an astounding 50 million man-hours, equating to approximately 5,700 years of labor. This figure represents only the immediate savings in construction time. It does not even account for the strategic advantages gained from faster deployment of ships, nor the lives saved because submarines could reach the Pacific sooner. Moreover, the impact extended beyond raw numbers. The morale boost among workers and military personnel, witnessing the rapid progress and surpassing production goals, played a significant role. The seemingly simple invention also contributed to reinforcing American naval strength, a deterrent that outpaced adversaries' expectations. The full scope of how Nelson's idea influenced the outcome of World War II may never be fully measured, yet there is no doubt that the United States' victory was as much rooted in the massive industrial capacity driven by such innovations as it was in military courage and strategic prowess. In the broader context, the soldiers, sailors, and marines who fought on the front lines were ultimately sustained and enabled by the relentless efforts of workers, engineers, and creative thinkers like Nelson. Individuals who identified problems and developed practical, effective solutions. Their refusal to accept inefficiency when a better way was within reach underscores a vital truth. In total war, every second saved translates directly into lives saved on the battlefield. As we confront the complex challenges of the 21st century, ranging from climate change and resource depletion to infrastructure decay, the importance of such innovation remains just as critical. These solutions will not only originate within the confines of elite universities or corporate laboratories. Instead, they will emerge from dedicated working people who can see problems clearly and find workable solutions. The next trailblazer might be a garage inventor creating a more efficient solar panel, or a factory worker pinpointing exactly where time and energy are being wasted. The next leap forward in efficiency could well come from someone the existing institutions have dismissed as unqualified. It is imperative that we listen carefully to these voices and foster an environment where innovation from all sources can flourish. Barriers that restrict or discourage grassroots inventors must be lowered, because history teaches us that real progress often begins where it is least expected. Whether it's a mechanic's insight, a nurse's ingenuity, or a teacher's resourcefulness, every individual who notices a problem and attempts to fix it might hold the key to solving the problems that threaten our future. Encouraging and supporting these diverse contributions is essential, for they carry the potential to spark the next great revolution. Just as small, seemingly insignificant ideas once reshaped the course of history and changed the world. Throughout history, some of the most groundbreaking innovations have originated not from within the established systems or mainstream institutions, but from individuals operating on the fringes. Those who refused to accept the status quo because the system itself would not listen or recognize their insights. These independent thinkers and tinkerers often challenge conventional wisdom, risking skepticism and rejection. Yet their persistence frequently results in revolutionary breakthroughs. Take, for example, Ted Nelson, a man who began his career as an everyday welder earning a modest $11 a day. Despite humble beginnings, he eventually rose to become a millionaire industrialist, a success driven by his innovative efforts that ended up saving his country in a significant way. Yet, amidst his considerable achievements, Nelson never lost sight of his roots or allowed arrogance to take hold. He never adopted an air of superiority, nor did he claim to be anything more than just a mechanic, someone deeply attuned to practical problems and motivated by a drive to solve them. In his later years, when people would ask about his remarkable success, he would modestly shrug and say, "I just made a better mousetrap." He believed his innovation was no stroke of genius, just good sense applied at the right moment. And indeed, it was that simple but perceptive application of common sense, when combined with courage, perseverance, and a willingness to challenge existing norms, that has the potential to alter the course of history. This simple act of turning a good idea into reality, of persistently seeking solutions, becomes Ted Nelson's enduring legacy. It isn't measured solely by the 50 million hours his innovations reportedly saved, nor by the 2 prestigious E awards he received, or even the global company that continues to carry his name. Instead, his true legacy lies in the powerful proof that a single individual, armed with a good idea and unwavering determination, can truly make a difference. Every time a welder activates a stud welding gun, or a ship is built more rapidly than before, or an inefficient process is questioned with the simple curiosity, "There has to be a better way," Nelson's spirit persists. In fact, Nelson posed that very question all the way back in 1941, asking if there was a more efficient way to do things. His answer, grounded in practical insight, not only contributed to innovative manufacturing but also played a role in winning a war, underscoring the profound impact of asking the right questions at the right time. Today, we might wonder, what questions are we asking ourselves? What problems are we willing to challenge that others deem unsolvable? More critically, when the experts declare something impossible, or when government officials insist on following established procedures, or when skeptics dismiss your ideas as foolhardy, will you have enough courage to stand firm and prove them wrong? History has repeatedly shown that sometimes, the most vital action is to ignore the naysayers and trust your own observations. It is often those who dare to deviate from the norm, those who believe in their solutions, that craft the real innovations. Nelson's example demonstrates that, even after nearly 80 years, welders across the globe still rely on his invention every day. Somewhere, perhaps in a tucked-away garage or a modest workshop, potentially the next Ted Nelson is sketching an idea that others declare impossible. But they will be mistaken, because the greatest innovations do not come from rigidly following procedures. They arise from people who see problems clearly, understand how to fix them, and refuse to accept no as an answer. In essence, innovation is fueled by individuals willing to challenge the established order, to question assumptions, and to pursue their ideas with relentless determination. Their courage and persistence create the future, often in defiance of expert opinions and bureaucratic barriers. Such stories remind us that the most transformative ideas are often born from the willingness to listen to one's own instincts, to challenge what is accepted, and to believe that change is possible when others see only obstacles.